You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Have you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 317 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. On today's show, I'm talking about the talks between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un that ended early. The U.S. is also in peace talks right now with the Taliban. More hostilities between India and Pakistan, and updates on Venezuela. Share the show or recommend it to a friend. The best place to find it online is at the Libertarian Institute. I also publish my daily news roundup there, so just libertarianinstitute.org, and you get all my work. This show's also on all the different podcatchers, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, YouTube, so wherever you need to find the show, it should be published there. If it's not, let me know, and I'll work to get it up on that site or app. And then if you really like the show, think about donating to it at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. I do produce a little bit of bonus content that you can find there. I also want to mention that you're going to notice that the title for the show and the feeds and, where I publish it is going to be a little bit different. I got email from Apple saying that I think they're trying to stop people from putting the show numbers in the feeds, and they just basically have different ways that shows need to be titled, or else you risk getting kicked off the platform. So just going to be preemptive here and hope not to run afoul and get kicked off of iTunes, which I know is a huge source for people getting content. And I'm just going to put the title of the show up there. If you decide that maybe the date would be helpful or something like that, I can see about throwing that in there as well. So just email me and let me know. First up on today's show, Venezuela. As you heard on Monday's show, episode 315, which it has been one of my favorites with Brian Sadie, talking about the drug war, El Chapo, and also the situation in Venezuela. We were recording that show that Saturday, and there was the ongoing concert by Richard Branson, the billionaire Virgin Airline guy, I believe. And basically, I think they were hoping for just all the Venezuelan troops, that are loyal to the Maduro government to drop their guns and walk across the borders and tear down the barricades and allow all this aid through. Or at the very least, the people would rise up and kind of push all the barricades out of the way, or maybe a conflict with the military there where, you have on camera on one side of the, border, freedom and prosperity and rock concerts and all that great liberal stuff, and also a bunch of aid to go help everybody else. And then on the other side, you had this mean, nasty government that's keeping the people from, getting to that aid and that good liberal order. Now, the problem with this, of course, isn't necessarily, portraying the Maduro government as bad, because it's certainly a brutal government. But, the alternative isn't that, that great liberal paradise. There's a lot of, interests that are coming in. And even if you listen to the rhetoric of the people of the Trump administration, they say it's about the oil. And if it's about the oil, then it's definitely about for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. So, this isn't a attempt at liberation and, introducing, what I would hope would be a libertarian society, but, even more any kind of a free market, freedom-based government, that's just not the alternative here. So what happens, I think very little of the aid actually ends up getting into the country. For the most part, there were no defections from the Venezuelan soldiers. I think there, were maybe a few dozen at the most. In the past week, I would say I read reports suggesting that 300 soldiers in total over the past week have defected, but confirmed actually seeing soldiers walk across the border, maybe 10 or a few dozen. Now, there was some conflict as some people did show up to the border to try to push the barricades out of the way. There certainly are people in Venezuela who are suffering under the Maduro government and would benefit from this aid coming across the border. I've read reports suggesting that 2 to 4 people were killed. One report said that one of the people, I guess, was either a Maduro supporter or some kind of Venezuelan government official, so, therefore on the side of the Maduro government. There were also at least 2 aid trucks that were set on fire. The initial reporting here really suggested that the Venezuelan government was behind it. However, some video evidence suggests otherwise. I saw some videos and photographs of what looked like the opposition, certainly wasn't Venezuelan military in uniform attempting to throw some accelerant on one of the aid trucks. Looks like gasoline to set it on fire. Another video showed, and this one I feel more comfortable with saying was actually the opposition that set the aid truck on fire. What looked like an opposition guy throws a Molotov cocktail. It looks like it's supposed to go at, the Venezuelan troops. And it just is an errant throw and it hits the aid truck. At least from what I've come across. I think that's about all for the major events of the whole circus with the concert and the aid convoy. To give an overall kind of assessment of what happened, I think it was a failure from the side of the U.S. Venezuelan opposition regime change effort. I think they would have hoped, to actually get the aid into the country and have a whole bunch of troops defect to the other side. I mean, that was the state mission. That clearly didn't happen. Looking at it more cynically, of course, I think probably there was a hope that if that didn't work out, that the Venezuelan forces would act in a way that's so obviously repressive and terrible. Something like you have in Egypt where the military just guns down innocent people in the streets. And the footage is just so shocking to everyone that, there's an increased rallying cry internationally and hopefully even within Venezuela to make the regime change happen. That really didn't happen either. And, there certainly were people that died, and not to, completely dismiss that, but overall, this wasn't a particularly violent event. There are a few more things that I think are worth pointing out that I've kind of learned in the whole reporting of this situation. One is that Venezuela is allowing aid into this country. It's not completely blocked off. It's not a situation where the people are desperately in the need of food and medicine, and the Maduro government is saying, hell no, we're not going to accept aid from anyone else. There actually is aid coming into the country when necessary. There's also been some excellent reporting by Matt Blumenthal and some of the guys with the Gray Zone Project on the ground in Venezuela. And they've shown that, at least in the areas of Venezuela that they've been and visited, that there is food on the shelves, that prices aren't perfect, but they're not in kind of hyperinflation mode where, you go and get a cup of coffee in the morning and it's $5, and you go in the afternoon and it's $7.50. So there's a real problem here where there's this hyped up need for aid in Venezuela that really isn't necessary. And as I said, even the international aid groups have come out and said this is obviously a political stunt. The sickest part of all this, of course, is that there's a country, Yemen, that is starving to death. You look at millions of people that are now right on the verge of famine conditions. And as a political stunt, you're trying to push all this aid into Venezuela and create instability where it's really not needed. And on the other side, you're helping Saudi Arabia keep aid out of Yemen. It's the worst kind of hypocrisy, and it's just absolutely disgusting. When we look at the status of the regime change effort, it doesn't look very good for the regime changers, I think, right now. I think this, concert and big event was supposed to be something that at least, ramped up the news cycle and attention towards this story. And it really hasn't happened. Now, part of this seems to me to be extremely poor planning. I mean, they did this on the weekend, and then the week was the Hanoi, summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un, and the Michael Cohen testimony. There was simply no room in the mainstream media news cycle to cover Venezuela as well. And so I don't think that helped whatsoever, but it does certainly seem to be on the subsiding side. Now, the overall issue, of course, is the U.S. puts all these additional sanctions on Venezuela. They're really going to hurt the Venezuelan people and the Venezuela economy moving forward here. And so while it would be great if we could just all pretend like this never happened, as Scott suggested on the show, the problem is that the sanctions, I think, would have to be removed as well. The last thing I want to talk about, just because I know everybody's already covered it, but I got to get my shot in here. Marco Rubio, that idiot, tweets out a picture of Gaddafi, happy, celebrating, wacky colonel, and then a picture of him as I think he's about to be shot in the head after he got sodomized by a bayonet. And basically, just kind of says, Maduro, this is what we have in store for you. And, maybe this is part of the reason why the regime change effort seemed to die out a little bit, because I don't think this was overall well received. People didn't find it as a cute, funny little internet meme tweet, realizing how brutal Gaddafi's death was, but how much of a failure the Libya policy has been for the United States. We did regime change there, and they're still selling slaves in that country now because of the instability created by our war and the fact that we helped the Libyan Islamic fighting group take over that country, which had huge factions of Al-Qaeda linked fighters and that very terrible extremist ideology. We helped that to take root in Libya. We helped spread all that chaos in that country, understanding, first of all, that there were other ways out and that we really didn't have to do it anyways because the reason we were intervening was all based off of lies. So I think, we should all still be concerned here, going back to Venezuela, that we could see a Libya unfold still where maybe Venezuela opposition takes control of a chunk of Venezuela and declares it to be its either own breakaway state or the proper government for the rest of Venezuela, or the kind of, lie they told about Gaddafi, saying that he was giving his soldiers Viagra so they could continue to rape the women of the people that, they were killing the husbands. And so there's a real fear, I think, that they tell those kind of lies that aren't true still. But so far, I think the regime change effort is fizzling. And hopefully Rubio's tweet is, I know, the jumping the sharp phrase of this whole Libya regime change effort. To update the situation in Haiti, a country there just really seems to be no room in the U.S. news cycle for. There is growing instability there against a government that I believe was put in place more or less by the United States and Canada. And so we had that interesting situation unfold where U.S., I'm sure some kind of contractors, former special operations, are on the ground, heavily armed in Haiti, arrested, shipped back to the United States, and allowed to go free without charges. This has apparently caused some internal political strife in Haiti, as, the Haitian people are very upset that these Americans were able to come to their country heavily armed and then escaped any kind of justice. But there's also some reporting in antiwar.com on how there's actually Canadian special forces right now in Haiti that are really helping the effort there. So I'll link to that in the show notes page. A little bit of history, a little bit of current events. I want to tackle one story about the U.S., and that's just note that my very least favorite person, Nikki Haley, has taken up position as a Boeing executive on the board of directors. So that's pretty disgusting. I'm sure she's going to make an awful lot of money and wield her influence with the Trump administration to push them to buy, I don't know, maybe F-15Xs that we don't really need. And there's so many better things that we can either do if we keep our own money or spend it on something else. All right, the summit with Kim Jong-un. I think this is probably the big headline story here. Leading up to the talks in this whole week, again, the Michael Cohen story was kind of number one in the news, and there's also the India-Pakistan conflict that has gotten a lot of attention. So I don't think there's been quite as much attention paid to the lead up of this summit as a Singapore summit, which is probably a good thing because, man, there was so much hate towards what Donald Trump was doing there. Overall, of course, lead up, it's met with establishment condemnation. Trump is going to give away the farm. He's going to get tricked by Kim Jong-un. Again, just like I talked about with the first summit, I don't understand what Donald Trump possibly has to even give away here. South Korea is far less concerned about a threat of North Korea than the United States. And so why do we need to present that South Koreans that they don't need it? You see tweets coming out here saying that, what they're looking for is to trick South Korea into demilitarizing. And first of all, it should seem incredibly insulting that we know better what the South Korean security needs are than they do. But it also really bothers me that, the people that say Trump is a fool for trying to make peace with Kim Jong-un also are huge supporters of his maximum pressure policy. And so you have a situation where, let's say, on the border with Mexico, now allowing the Mexican people into the United States is a horrible, racist, evil policy. And, the big orange man is terrible and we all hate him. But when then it comes to North Korea, Trump says that, we're not allowing any kind of commerce with the North Korean people or the government. And even though they're all starving to death, the point here is that we're going to make them suffer so much that they, give up their nuclear weapons because we're threatening them all the time and, completely become subservient to what the Americans believe, their defense policies should be. Well, that's a policy that they all get behind and say, oh, that's what Trump needs to stick to, maximum pressure. Because what they were afraid of is that Donald Trump was going to abandon that policy, go to Hanoi, and sign an agreement with Kim Jong-un that relieves some sanctions on North Korea in exchange for North Korea taking more steps towards denuclearization. Now, what actually happens is supposed to be 2 days of talks. Trump and Kim meet on the second day. I think they're supposed to chat for a couple hours, have a lunch, and then have a signing agreement. And there seemed to be like several kinds of different agreements they could pick to sign. The meeting ended a half hour early. The lunch was canceled. The signing agreement was canceled. And then Trump gave a press conference. And statements from Trump and Mike Pompeo were generally that, we came to an impasse, so we ended the talks, but overall it was progress. So this is obviously a disappointment in the sense that we're really hoping here to maybe get it's kind of ceremonial, still important official end to the Korean War, or maybe seeing a concrete agreement signed where North Korea gives up the location of their nuclear weapons or a nuclear weapon to the United States in exchange for a certain kind of sanctions or relief. Something that along the lines of what we had with the Iran nuclear agreement. And that didn't happen either. However, I don't think we need to be super pessimistic about the Korean peace process overall. It's certainly a setback. We would hope to take more steps forward here. However, these peace processes and agreements take a long time to develop. The Iran nuclear agreement with Obama, I think they started negotiating that in like 2012 and it wasn't signed until 2015. So, we could expect this, to take years. And assuming, if Trump ends up being a 2-term president, maybe at the end of his presidency, but, hopefully within the next couple of years, we'll start to see some more steps being taken. I think the general kind of immediate consensus here is that there must have been an impasse between Trump and North Korea, whereas, Trump insisted that they have to give up all their nukes and North Korea said that we're not going to do that. Or that North Korea wouldn't give up any nukes unless there was some sanctions relief in exchange. And this was the the problem is. Now, hopefully, long term that this could be worked out if this is what happened. There's also some speculation, however, now I'm seeing today reporting that what happened was John Bolton insisted that Trump include the chemical and biological weapons, that North Korea would have to give up their chemical and biological weapons as well as their nuclear weapons. And when that happened, the North Koreans countered with, okay, but then you have to lift every sanction. And so that's what caused it. And so if, John Bolton really is responsible for killing this, I can't say how much I hate that guy, but man, it would just be the absolute worst kind of thing. And just, another very bloody dark mark to add to his absolutely horrific legacy. One other development from this is we have Donald Trump saying that he personally asked Kim Jong-un about what happened to Otto Warmbier, and Kim Jong-un said that he, didn't order the young man's death. And Donald Trump was, publicly saying he would take him on his word on this. Now, I know some of you out there are more supportive of Trump and are really looking at this through the art of the deal lens, and I am certainly sure there's reasons to do that, and that part of Donald Trump's general negotiating strategy is to get all pissed off and walk away, hoping that that'll pressure the other side into giving up more than they otherwise would have, even if he was even willing to sign the agreement in front of them. It's about getting every last dollar, every last cent, every last inch you can, because, that's the way you win in negotiating. Now, as bad as the establishment has been on this, and a lot of them are actually celebrating Trump now because he walked away from the negotiating table with Kim Jong-un, I do want to say that there is a group of, bipartisan support for this, but there are some Democrats like Ro Khanna and Barbara Lee who have gone out to say that the United States should be. We also had Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who on Twitter this past week was absolutely relentless, pointing out that the North Korean regime may not be so keen on signing a one-way give up all of your nukes agreement with the United States because of the U.S. regime change in Iraq and Libya, 2 states who gave up their weapons of mass destruction programs prior to being regime changed by the United States, and the fact that the Trump administration backed out of the Iran nuclear deal, even though they're abiding by it, we're now trying to re-sanction that country. All right, I do want to talk about what's happening in India and Pakistan this past week because it's very important. Last time I updated the show on the end of last week, tensions were ratcheting up. Troops were on the move. The most recent round of tensions was sparked when a Kashmiri man who his family says was brutalized by the Indian troops that occupy Indian-administered Kashmir, drove a massive car bomb into a bus carrying Indian soldiers, killing 40. The Indian government claims the man who made that bomb is a member of a group that lives in Pakistan, and has ties to the Pakistani government and military. And the general consensus that you see from the Indian government and the parts of Indian press that make it into English is that the Pakistani government is responsible for this, with some even calling for war. Now, the Pakistani position would be that the bomb maker wasn't associated with the Pakistani government or the Pakistani military. And I don't know if they've, gone into the blowback and the oppression of, the Kashmiri people by the Indians here, but, that's generally would be their take on as to why this happened. So tensions heated up. We had some shelling going on, artillery fire across the line. As far as I was, reading, I didn't come across any reported casualties on either side because of this, but it's not uncommon for scores of Indian and Pakistanis to be killed every year in little skirmishes between the two countries. The big escalation was when Indian fighter jets crossed into Pakistani-administered Kashmir and attempted to carry out airstrikes. Now, the Pakistani government says those airstrikes hit uninhabited forest area and that one man was injured. I've seen claims coming from the Indian government that they say they killed a few hundred people, I guess, targeting the terrorist group that carried out the attack. Results of the attack that we do know are 2 Indian planes were shot down, 1 plane downed in Pakistani-administered Kashmir, and that pilot was captured by the Pakistani government. Well, I believe the other pilot escaped to the, Indian-controlled territory before, that plane crashed. Pakistan responded by carrying out airstrikes in Indian-administered Kashmir. The president says, Imran Khan, that the strikes targeted an empty area, that nobody was injured and it was just a show of force move. I haven't seen this narrative countered by the Indian government. I'm recording this show on February 28th, and I did see today that the president of Pakistan tweeted out that the Indian pilot would be given back to India on Friday, which is the day this podcast should air, March 1st. My only concern here is I know that Pakistan, unlike the United States, I think the military in ISI, which is their CIA-ish paramilitary group, operate pretty independently of the kind of civilian government there. Of course, the fear here is the nukes that both sides possess, and with, the troop positions and the threat that the Indians really wouldn't attack Pakistani-administered Kashmir. This, would be a lot of very difficult fighting, but rather go for kind of the flatlands, the plains of Pakistan, where their overwhelming force would likely be able to overcome Pakistan's much smaller army, could really easily provoke a nuclear war. Well, we're talking about really stupid things that nuclear powers are doing. I want to talk about the United States again sailing 2 warships through the Taiwan Strait. This is something that at one point in time was only happening about once a year, but now seems to be happening nearly monthly. I think 6 times in 2018, with most of those weighted towards the end of the year. Is really going to be something that's going to increasingly upset the Chinese military and hopefully doesn't provoke any kind of show of force response from the Chinese that creates some kind of conflict. There are peace talks going on with the Taliban, and while I do like it when the wars are covered in the mainstream media, the fact that this has gone under the radar may be a good thing, because typically all they do is criticize Donald Trump when he's trying to end the wars. These are high-level talks. I believe the mullah, who is the quote-unquote head of the Taliban, I'm not sure how connected the Taliban are and how, if every single branch and faction of the Taliban are actually sworn loyal and would do what this guy says, but the United States is in talks with the head of the Taliban, which seems like it could be a great thing. The focus of those talks are supposed to be the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about today's show is Yemen and what's unfolding there. It's been a pretty important week for Yemen that it really hasn't gotten covered. There was supposed to be a deal being done here for the Houthis to give up some of the ports actually in the city of Hodeidah, the one that's able to offload fuel and the one that's able to offload grain over to UN control. And then the Yemeni government side was supposed to withdraw from the, I guess, suburbs of Hodeidah. There are a couple stories out there saying that the UN has gotten more access to the grain silos and the ports there, the fuel ports there. So maybe this does mean that the Houthis did withdraw some forces there, but it doesn't seem like that is going super fast. And meanwhile, the country is really starving. The UN is trying to raise $4.2 billion to support Yemen with aid in 2019. And so far has only raised $2.6 billion. But this is a record amount of aid that's being raised right now for a crisis that's been inflicted upon Yemen. This isn't something that occurred because of internal strife in Yemen. It's not something that occurred because of a tsunami or some other kind of drought event that you can't control. It's something that was created by a man-made blockade of Yemen. An American was freed from captivity in Yemen after being held by 18 months. He was an oil worker. Other than his son saying that he's doing well, that's about all we know, including not really quite sure who was holding him. Apparently he got abducted from Sana'a, which would have been controlled by the Houthis at the time he was abducted. But there was no blame placed on the Houthis, so it's kind of head scratcher because you think they would use that propaganda had they could. And right now being say, oh, we got this from this guy from the Houthis. The Houthis for their part said that they didn't have him and that he was held by terrorists. Not sure what actually that guy was doing, where he was, or who was holding him, but it's great that he's been freed. All right, and to wrap up here for the week, I just want to end off with what the status of the Yemen War Powers resolution is and what's going to happen with that. So apparently on the House bill, they had passed an amendment that condemned Representative Ilhan Omar for her comments about AIPAC, using their money to change Washington policy. And then the Senate parliamentarian ruled that this was a change to the bill that no longer made it privileged and therefore it wasn't going to come up in the Senate. So Bernie Sanders figured out how it fits the problem and he basically just introduced a new clean Yemen War Powers bill. And once this passes the Senate, which it was able to pass last November, then it would go to the House with its privileged status and hopefully be able to pass the House without any weird amendments to it that somehow change it in a way that made Donald Trump be able to continue to wage the war in Yemen. I think we should expect the House votes, or the Senate vote, sometime in the next 1 or 2 weeks. And Bernie Sanders' office said that Representative Ro Khanna, who pushed the bill in the House the first time, is on board with the new strategy. So hopefully it works out. Not usually cheerleading the Democrat Party like this, but they're getting the Yemen one right this time. All right, that's it for the week. Hope everybody enjoyed the shows, especially Monday and Wednesday having Brian Sadie on the show to talk about the drug war. And man, I thought we had an incredible discussion on that show. It's definitely one of my favorites. I also had Adam Graham on to discuss the sinking of the Maine and then the kind of regime change propaganda effort that was enacted by the U.S. after, and how that resembles so much of what we're going through today. And it is really so important when you look at the situation in Venezuela to just see how, they would look to exploit anything like a burning aid truck, like civilians dying as a way to really overthrow and bring military might to Venezuela. Find the show online at thelibertarianinstitute.org. My news website is immersionnews.com. Please check that thing out. I think it's a really cool thing. And I post even more news in there than I actually do in my news roundups, which of course are at the Libertarian Institute and now appear at the LPMC, that's the Liberty Party Mises Caucus website. Support the show at patreon.com/foreign policy focus. Make sure you're subscribing to it in all the different podcatchers and everything like that. And while you're there, one of the things that you could do that would help out is giving me ratings and reviews for the show. Apparently that helps in all of the different kind of algorithms and stuff like that. And then check out the Facebook page, Libertarian Union.